evening. I'd like to call the October 19th, 2020 Wilson School Board meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Mr. Case?
Here.
Mrs. Casper?
Here.
Dr. Kennedy?
Here.
Mrs. Cocker?
Here.
Mr. Martin? Mr. McCray? Mr. Negrini?
Here.
Mr. Schneider?
Here.
Mr. Hart?
Here.
9 present, 0 absent.
Please stand for the pledge of the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mrs. Carroll, do we have any public participation for the agenda items? Okay. Would you like to say anything, John, or wait, save it till the end?
She does have one for non-agenda, so she'll read that. Now, if it's okay, I'll dispense with actually giving her the instructions, since she's just going to be reading.
That'd be great, okay. We met in executive session this evening to discuss personnel issues. 2.1, request to approve the minutes of the school board meeting held on October 5th, 2020, as attached. Looking for a motion? Mr. McCray first. Do we have a second? Mr. Schneider. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Treasurer's report. Mr. Martin.
Mr. President, I submit for approval tonight payment of bills out of general fund of $1,375,366.67, and out of the 2019-8 construction fund, $218,640.21.
Mr. Martin made it first. Do we have a second motion?
Second case.
Mr. Case. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Case?
Yes.
Mrs. Casper?
Yes.
Dr. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mrs. Cocker?
Yes.
Mr. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. McCray?
Yes.
Mr. Negrini?
Yes.
Mr. Schneider?
Yes.
Mr. Hart?
Yes.
9 for, 0 against.
Hold on. Technical difficulties.
Mr. President, I submit for approval tonight the treasurer's report, the investment report, the general fund reports as presented.
That's first. We have a second. Mr. Schneider. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Casper?
Yes.
Dr. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mrs. Cocker?
Sorry, yes.
Mr. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. McCray?
Yes.
Mr. Negrini?
Yes.
Mr. Schneider?
Yes.
Mr. Case?
Yes.
Mr. Hart?
Yes.
9 for, 0 against.
No. Okay. Dr. Fady, I'll turn it over to you for superintendent's report.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. I present this evening the personnel and program recommendations for board consideration.
Motion. Mr. Case, do we have a second? Mrs. Casper, any discussion? Yes. Roll call, please.
I
I'm
think,
sorry, did we financial
Mike has-
reports or?
Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
was
We
gonna say,
missed yours.
when we're done voting this, we need to go
Okay.
back to number 5.
Sorry about that. My computer went dead. I apologize.
That's all right.
Voting on superintendent's report, then we'll move on back to financial reports. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Dr. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mrs. Cocker?
Yes.
Mr. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. McCray?
yes.
Mr. Negrini?
Yes.
Mr. Schneider?
Yes.
The list was-
Mr. Case?
Yes.
Mrs. Casper?
Yes.
Mr. Hart?
Yes.
9 for, 0 against.
Payment of bills, Mr. Martin.
I'm going to, not the bills, but we have financial reports. I'm
Thank you.
sorry.
I'm back up now. Thank you.
These are all for September. We have the cafeteria report, the child care report, the Southern Middle School report, the Wilson West Middle School, and the senior high report as presented.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Mr. Schneider, any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Cocker?
Yes.
Mr. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. McCray?
Yes.
Mr. Negrini?
Yes.
Mr. Schneider?
Yes.
Mr. Case?
Yes.
Mrs. Casper?
Yes.
Dr. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mr. Hart?
Yes.
9 for, 0 against.
Ratification and approval of following field trips. Mrs. Conker.
Yes. 7.1, request permission to approve a trip to Australia and New Zealand for 24 technology education students with updated date of August 11th through August 22nd, 2021. The cost of the students remains the same, $5,995 plus transportation. There is no cost to the district for substitute teachers. Students will be still be chaperoned by Mr. Dunkelberger, Mrs. Denny's, and Mr. Denny's if needed. Original field trip was approved on October 7th, 2019. 7.2, request permission to approve a trip to Disney World for 100 band, chorus, orchestra, and theater students from June 7th to June 12th, 2021. The cost of the students is approximately $1,800. This includes trip insurance should there be a CDC travel ban to Florida. There is no cost to the district for substitute teachers. Students will be chaperoned by Mrs. Fredericks, Mrs. Kuhn, Mr. Cooper, Ms. Lennon, and others as needed. 7.3, request permission to approve a trip to St. Anne's Bay, there you go, Jamaica, for 24 high school AP Environmental AP Bio students from February 1st to February 5th, 2021, 5 days out of school. Approximate cost of students is $2,300. No fault trip. Insurance will be included in the price in case COVID-19 prevents any or all students from traveling. Cost of the district is 5 substitute teachers for 5 days. Students will be chaperoned by Mr. Doms, Mrs. Houts, and 1 chaperone to be determined.
Thank you. Looking for a motion to approve items 7.1 through 7.3. Mr. Case, do we have a second?
Cocker?
Mrs. Cocker, second. Any discussion? Ms. Martin.
I have two things. The first thing, are these students going to be required to quarantine for 2 weeks when they get home? The second question I have has to do with the band trip. From what I understand, that only happens once every 4 years. And I feel kind of like a lot of parents aren't going to think this is a bad idea, because it kind of is, to go to Florida right now. So I was thinking, is it possible for the band to maybe do this year and maybe 2 years from now, rather, or this year and next year? Can they do it so that so many students won't, have another, that a mom doesn't have to feel like her 9th grader is going to miss out on this whole experience because of the pandemic? Like, maybe if it happened a little bit more often, more students, it might be open for more students. Just this one time, I'm not saying all the time. And along with my question about quarantining, in general, are we requiring parents, I know several families that will be heading to Florida in November. Are we going to require those students to, when they go to Disneyland, to quarantine when they get back? Because really, we should be. That's the recommendation from Pennsylvania, if you're going to any of these high-risk states, to come back and quarantine for two full weeks.
So the first question is in reference to the trip for the band this year, and whether or not we considered splitting the number of band students that go this year and so offering it this year and in 2 years in the event that some parents choose
Yes.
to do that. I certainly think that we could talk with Mr. Cooper and see if he's willing to do that. I think that makes sense. Just in the event, I wanted to share with you, I had conversations with one of the teachers in reference to the trips. They understand right now that these are being approved with the contingency that if there are any changes in the safety issues related to these trips, that they understand that they will be canceled. But they wanted to get these on the docket so that they could begin to fundraise and those types of things. So in reference to the quarantining for students or staff or parents that are going into areas that are designated as quarantines when they return. Obviously, they would have to self-report that, and obviously, the answer to the question is yes. If they were to come back from certain areas that are currently on the quarantine list, we would ask them to do so.
So these students will be quarantining when they come back?
Uh,
Because they're all going on planes.
Well, these particular students aren't
Until
going
June, so.
until June
Well,
and
yeah,
August.
but the
So, I mean,
Jamaica one's coming up. It's in
Sure.
February.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, I think we have to see what the, what the
Right,
policy or
I-
guidelines are at that point before we make that determination.
Right. I mean, planes are, right, we have a lot of families that are going on, trips right now in planes, and planes are one of the more dangerous activities, regardless of where you're going.
Dr. Hoffer, can you address some of those
So, just a point of
questions?
clarification. So we are following, if you look at the staying safe guidelines from the Department of Health and the Department of Education that we're using in this county to make our determinations, page 8, column I, specifically addresses anyone who leaves the state and comes back. And what the guidelines say is, students may continue to come to school unless they are mandated to quarantine by the Department of Health. So right now, the only thing on the Department of Health website is a recommendation for a quarantine, and that includes out of the country trips. So what we've been recommending to families is that they follow, they follow that recommendation, but it's not something that we can mandate according to the way that protocol is written.
So we're having kids that are going to Disney World over Thanksgiving, and they're going to come back, and
So unless the Department of Health comes out with a mandated quarantine, that's the guideline that we've been following. It's column I on page 8 of that guide.
I'm sad that you know the column. I'm not going to lie, Dr. Hofford.
Thank you, Dr. Hopper.
Any further discussion? Mr. Martin?
Yeah, this came up a couple times in my discussion with the task force, and I just sometimes have a difficult time allowing, trips like $5,000, because the average student can't afford that. And I think and I'm not going to vote against this, of course, but I think we got to look at equity. I mean, there's families that can't afford this stuff, and some of these trips I know there's fundraisers that they can make a reasonable cost, but I just have I have a little bit of angst about a trip to New Zealand at $6,000, because I know I can't afford that, but sometimes it's not intended to be a negative, but I can see how a family that, just gets by can say, wow, look at that, I wish we could do that. And it's just something to keep in the back of our minds, that's all, just as we move forward.
Mr. Martin, what would be the suggestion to address that? Would it be to perhaps through the Ed Foundation or some other contribution to offset those costs? I certainly don't think not having those opportunities because they may be too expensive for others would be the answer. I don't think we should be taking away opportunities from individuals as opposed to trying to make those more readily available to families. Hopefully that's the point that you were trying
Yes,
to make.
I'm trying to think, we have to come up with a method that when we look at this, I mean, there's criteria involved too. I mean, you gotta be in certain classes for certain things, of course. But there should be a way that if I really wanna go, there's an opportunity somehow, I can, raise some money on myself, but there's gotta be some type of, safety cushion to help, that's all. I mean, something that if you really wanna go, there's an opportunity you could go, that's it.
I also look at it from the,
trip. There are students that have gone on that trip that they were funded, at least for that trip. I'm not sure, maybe Dr. Trickett can speak of maybe the average cost of a student for New Zealand. Is that the full price, or?
So that cost includes the total cost for chaperones. That's where those international trips really move up quickly. We do our best at the building level. All secondary buildings, I would imagine is true in elementary. If we hear of children that are in need for the counselor, the social worker, teachers, the community, we try to find the resources. Now, funding fully a $6,000 trip don't know if we can do that, but we have done some very creative things, and maybe with some more targeted approaches, we can even do a better job creating more opportunity for kids.
I would also say a little bit, maybe counter to your point, I agree, $6,000 is a lot for an individual to go down there. I think, though, with the opportunity to fundraise and so forth, and cut the cost of that trip, it may actually open up the opportunity to somebody who wouldn't have the $6,000 but can come up with a partial amount to participate in something like this that they wouldn't have otherwise had the opportunity to do. So I think we got to look at it from that perspective too, that with the opportunity to fundraise and defray partial of those costs, they'll have an opportunity they may not have the rest of their lives to do that.
That's the part. In Cub Scouts, a benefactor left us money to help, X amount of Cub Scouts that have difficulties in going on trips. So we pull from that fund. It doesn't cost our general treasurer anything, but we do have a benefactor that left us several $1,000s. And I just feel that we're trying to give everybody that same opportunity, that's all. It's just something for thought. That's it.
Thank you. Any other discussion? First and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Consent items. Mrs. Cocker.
Yes. 8.1, request to accept with gratitude the following donation. The extracurricular, facilities, and finance committees are happy to accept with gratitude the donation from the Wilson Youth Lacrosse Organization of a shed to be placed on the Wilson West Middle School campus with exact placement to be determined by administration. Also to accept with gratitude the construction and donation of 2 lacrosse walls for training purposes to be placed in the high school campus with placement to be determined by administration.
Thank you. Do we have a first? Mr. McCray, is there a second? Mr. Negrini, any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? 9.1, request approval of the special education instructional assistant vision support job description as attached. 9.2, request to approve the employees for specialized leave under the FFCRA to ensure specialized leave to ensure PSERS years of service credit is maintained. 9.3, request to approve the tuition reimbursement MOU between the WEA and Wilson School District as attached. Looking for a motion to approve 9.1 through 9.3 as presented. Yes, we can do that. Mrs. Carroll, we're going to vote on 9.1 and 9.2, and then we're going to pull out 9.3 by itself. So whenever you're ready, Mrs. Carroll.
Cocker first.
Okay.
First, we have a second. Dr. Kennedy. Any discussion on 9.2 and 9.1 and 9.2? Roll call, please.
Mr. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. McCray?
Yes.
Mr. Negrini?
Yes.
Mr. Schneider?
Yes.
Mr. Case?
Yes.
Mrs. Casper?
Yes.
Dr. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mrs. Cocker?
Yes.
Mr. Hart?
Yes.
9-4, 0 against.
9.3, request to approve the tuition reimbursement MOU between the WEA and Wilson School District as attached. Do we have a motion?
Cocker first.
Mrs. Cocker first. Do we have a second? Dr. Kennedy, any discussion?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Martin?
This is pretty tough for me to swallow, only because when we looked at this, and the HR committee looked at this, they invited, comment from teachers, and a lot of this was blamed on past superintendents. And there might have been reasons that some of these policies were different depending on the situation. The superintendent has his rights to do certain things. So I just feel that we should interview, if it was Rudy Ruth, we should have invited him to speak on some of these issues to get the full story versus just one side of it. I always like to get all comments. And, that's the only thing I think we missed out on this, just having that opportunity just to follow up and see exactly what transpired. That's it.
Any other discussion or comments? Looking for a motion? Oh, we did that. Mrs. Carroll, roll call, please.
Okay. Mr. Negrini?
Yes.
Mr. Schneider?
Yes.
Mr. Case?
Abstain.
Mrs. Casper?
Yes.
Dr. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mrs. Cocker?
Yes.
Mr. Hart?
Yes.
8 yes, 1 abstain.
10.1, request permission to approve the adoption of a tuition contract agreement with Children's House of Reading, Center Avenue Academy at a cost of $208 per special education student per day for the 2020-21 school year. 10.2, request approval of a service agreement with Solient Health LLC for future health services contract staffing and temp to hire placement pending solicitor review and approval. Looking for a motion to approve 10.1 and 10.2 as presented. Mrs. Casper first, do we have a second? Mr. Martin second, any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Negrini?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Case?
Yes.
Mrs. Casper?
Yes.
Dr. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mrs. Cocker?
Yes.
Mr. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. McCray?
Yes.
Mr. Hart?
Yes.
9 yes, 0 no.
Under operations, 11.1, request permission to bid for repairs of the auditorium tile at the recommendation of the facilities extracurricular and finance committees. Looking for a motion? Mr. Martin first, Mr. Negrini second. Any discussion? Yes, go ahead.
The timing of this bid is so that those figures can come in. Hopefully, they will come in within a proposed budget price. The tiling of the natatorium typically requires a small window of opportunity considering how frequently the pool is utilized. So the Facilities Committee, in conjunction with our Finance and Extracurricular Committee meeting that we just had, felt it prudent to start this process sooner than later. The retiling is long overdue. It's become a safety issue with some of the tile fracturing and cutting some of our swimmers' feet. So that's why we're recommending to go forward with bids at this time.
Thank you. Any other discussion or comments? Roll call, please.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Case?
Yes.
Mrs. Casper?
Yes.
Dr. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mrs. Cocker?
Yes.
Mr. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. McCray?
Yes.
Mr. Negrini?
Yes.
Mr. Hart?
Yes.
9 for, 0 against.
Under Finance, 12.1, in accordance with government's accounting standards, board statement. The board commits the 2019-2020 general fund excess of revenues over expenditures for the future PSERS employer contributions. 12.2, request approval of budget transfers dated July 1st, 2020 through October 14th, 2020 as attached. Looking for a motion to approve 12.1, 12.2 as presented. Mr. Martin first, do we have a second? Mr. Schneider, any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Case?
Yes.
Mrs. Casper?
Yes.
Dr. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mrs. Cocker?
Yes.
Mr. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. McCray?
Yes.
Mr. Negrini?
Yes.
Mr. Schneider?
Yes.
Mr. Hart?
Yes.
9 for, 0 against.
Under Curriculum and Staff Development, 13.1, request approval of the 2020-2021 Reading Area Community College Wilson School District Dual Enrollment Agreement pending solicitor review and approval. Looking for a motion? Mrs. Casper first, do you have a second? Dr. Kennedy, any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mrs. Casper?
Yes.
Dr. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mrs. Cocker?
Yes.
Mr. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. McCray?
Yes.
Mr. Negrini?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Case?
Yes.
Mr. Hart?
Yes.
9 for, 0 against.
Under Transportation, Mrs. Cocker?
14.1, request approval to purchase transportation vehicles for the 2020-2021 school year from the proceeds of the general obligation note series of 2019 A and B as presented. 14.2, request approval to proceed with bidding the work for the propane infrastructure to include electrical, civil, concrete, and related items, and tank and pumps to be paid from the proceeds of the general obligation note series of 2019 A and B as presented. 14.3, request approval to contract with Consolidated Engineers for electrical engineering needed to prepare plans to proceed with the propane infrastructure at a cost of $4,000 to be paid from the proceeds of the general obligation note series of 2019 A and B as presented. And 14.4, request approval to proceed with pursuing the AFIG VW grants, 50% of infrastructure total cost up to $600,000 and up to $150,000 for vehicles with the Eastern Pennsylvania Alliance for Clean Transportation. EPACT as presented.
Looking for a motion to approve items 14.1 through 14.4. Mr. Negrini first. Do we have a second? Mr. Martin? Any discussion?
Yes, everybody in this room knows my disappointment based on my emails and some research over the weekend with regard to choosing propane gas. I believe Wilson is really losing an opportunity for a 10-year investment to look at electric buses. They are not for tree huggers. There are many, many school districts that are going that way. The battery research with Elon Musk he's not just building a car company, he is building battery companies, and the technology is getting less and less expensive and more mainstream. There's a lot of grant money. So some history here based on what the board was presented. We were presented some options and comparative analysis cost estimates with regard to diesel, natural gas, and propane. Electric buses were not on that list at all. So they were left off the table, not even considered for the board to take a good analysis of. I've had some conversations with our transportation director. They've been very good conversations. There's a lot of money out there. There's $3 billion for the Dieselgate with Volkswagen. There's the AFIG grant money. I don't believe we have even looked into PP&L or the utility companies on what they would offer for us, but we could probably get infrastructure within here at Wilson and 6 or 7 buses, possibly at the same cost as a diesel bus. That's just a guess. But if we haven't even taken a look at that and that hasn't been presented to the board, we haven't done our homework. So what I have asked for from this board was this to be even pulled from tonight's meeting so we can go back and do a comparative analysis, and that has not happened. It's on the board agenda tonight. I will be voting no for it, and it's not a no, I'm not anti-propane. I would like to get 2 or 3 electric bus vendors here to present the options. I would like to reach out to PP&L or have our administration go through the proper channels to do that, or our utility company, and see what is available. Time is of the essence. I mean, there's some grants that are due by the end of this month and then the mid of next month. But I don't think we've done 100% of our homework. I'm sure Randy will come up and discuss possibly otherwise, but we've had our propane supplier write some of our grants. I was overstepping my bounds and reached out to a couple of electric bus vendors, and they are willing to write electric bus grants that could possibly get us a whole bunch of money to do that. So I can read all the benefits of electric buses, the 70% energy cost reduction or 70 to 80% maintenance savings versus diesel. They have some crazy number, like 20 moving parts or 20 parts to an electric engine versus 3,000 for a diesel engine. I mean, there's no fluids, there's barely any maintenance, no oil changes, no fuel, no air filters. They're saying basically over the course of 12 or 13 years for an electric bus that it would be the same cost or more savings than diesel and or propane. So again, what I would be asking with a no vote is if we had 5 no votes, we would go back and at least spend a week reaching out to vendors and taking a look at what is out there and what's available instead of going forward. This is a 10-year decision. Electrics now. Propane was 10 years ago. So let's take a look at electric. And I'm hoping to get some support here so we can at least do some homework. There's nothing saying that we have to make a vote on this today for propane. And again, I'm not anti-propane. I'm saying let's do a little bit more homework and see what else is out there. This is 10 years. I mean, it's a 10-year payback for what, $100,000 based on when I was looking at this for propane? So let's consider this. Even if we waste 2 weeks looking, we could be back at the table and looking at propane again. I would be better with that decision than rushing this. And again, I'm coming in here at the last minute, but
I agree. I think
we should take a step back and try to look at some other options. I don't know enough about this to really, know the difference. So, I would agree with, why aren't we looking at or considering these other options? And is it a timely thing? Do we have to make a decision soon? So I'm just wondering.
Dr. Payton?
So, in reference to the questions regarding diesel and propane and electric, I had asked our transportation director to take a look at the financial implications to all three avenues in relationship to specifically diesel and propane and electric. There are some pros to electric, and I would agree with Mr. Case that electric vehicles may be an option for the district in the future, but there are some definite drawbacks for electric vehicles in the climate that we currently exist in. So the electric vehicles' successes are occurring in climates that are much warmer than ours, specifically the ones that we referenced were California. But in a climate that's very similar to ours, like New York, those buses have failed miserably. The cost associated, and I think we have a financial document that we can put up on the screen to kind of demonstrate how we got to where we are with our recommendation to bring to the board. Electric buses, batteries are extremely expensive. And in a climate like ours, the replacement of those batteries is recommended every 6 years. So what that means is not only do we have the financial costs associated with the differential between an electric bus and a propane bus, but we also have the added expense every 6 years, with each bus requiring an additional $100,000 investment to replace the batteries. There are a lot of vendors out there that will share specific information with you regarding electric buses, but they will leave quite a bit of information out of their analysis with you. So if you look up on the screen, if we can blow that up just a little bit maybe. Randy or Christine, do you want to kind of walk through this document? And in terms of due diligence, one of the things that we always have to keep in the front of our mind is, we have limited resources as a district, and we're trying to do the best we can to number one, to be forward-thinking and progressive, to save dollars, but also understand that, the differential in cost between an electric bus and a propane bus at the current point in time is significant. So, we're looking at, with the need to replace 7 buses, we're looking at an additional $350,000 of cost between propane and electric, excluding the investments that we have to make in infrastructure with electric, upgrading our electric phase from, I don't know all the technical terms, but a cost that could be extremely expensive, and I think Jeff can probably speak to that. Infrastructure upgrade being potentially in the millions to bring us up to the point where we can actually charge these buses in our transportation facility. And then the current problem is exacerbated by the fact that these electric buses have a very limited mileage radius in terms of between charges, and that's a significant concern for us because we far exceed the amount of miles that could be put on many of our buses in our school district in a single day, and not having the ability to recharge those buses. So Randy, kind of walk us through the financial analysis
Sure.
at a high level and and then maybe from your expertise as a transportation director over time, how did we end up with your recommendation this evening?
Sure. So if we look at the comparison, Mr. Case was able to provide a very good comparison between electric and diesel. And what I did was I took the same comparators for propane, and what you see on the screen is the comparison between propane, electric, and diesel. Now, the electric and diesel costs or comparison, total cost of ownership is directly from, I believe, Mr. Case, this is from Lion Bus. So I use their numbers, and they're basing the replacement cycle on 15 years, which we currently hold our buses about 12 years before we replace them. But to make an apples-to-apples comparison, I kept everything the same. And as you can see, you know, the bus cost is probably the biggest driver to the difference in the total cost of ownership. You look at a propane bus, we're about $96,000. You look at an electric bus, Lion Bus quoted $375,000. The prices I got from the other vendors were $310,000 to $320,000 based on our configuration. So I thought Lion's number was a little bit high, but again, I ran with what they had. And then our current cost of a diesel is about $90,000. There are grants and subsidies out there. We talked about the AFIG grant. That grant is due in mid-December, and that can bring us the difference between the cost of a diesel bus and the cost of a propane bus. So that's why you see on line 7, column D, the $8,500 grant or subsidy. That's the AFIG grant. There's the VW lawsuit funding that's out there, and that can bring us, so again, Lion has for electric, that grant is $200,000. The grant is actually $182,000, so they probably rounded up. But we are able to get up to $150,000 if we qualify. The big point with all the grants is you still have to qualify. City of Philadelphia, Springfield Township, and Lower Marion all applied for grants for electric buses, and they didn't get the grants. So again, there is always that option with any of the grants, whether it's electric, propane, or whatever methodology. So as you follow down, again, using the same methodology, at the end of the day, the cost of ownership of a propane bus is actually, in this comparison, which doesn't include tires, it doesn't include brakes, which was noted in the comparison provided to us, propane is the cheaper of the costs. Now, electric will be an up-and-coming technology. As Dr. Faley had expressed, the battery issue is real. In warmer weather climates, the batteries hold up. They last longer during the day, so when you see the range of an electric bus in the western part of the United States, 100 miles to a charge is appropriate. The charge for these batteries in upstate New York, which again is a similar climate to ours, is not. It is about 60 to 70 miles per charge. California can quick charge. They can get a 50% charge in about 3 to 4 hours. In the colder climates, you can. It takes the 8 to 9 hours. So again, not bad-mouthing electric. I think it is a vehicle of the future. It's just not today. And it's not, in my opinion, based on research and talking to different vendors, it's not the technology of the next 5 to 8 years. Propane is. Electric states that it's a zero emissions technology. Propane is a 0.02 emissions technology. So again, it's not quite zero, but in the current climate of what diesel is, it is a dramatic improvement. The PP&L situation, I actually talked at length with a gentleman by the name of Bob Gallo. He's a regional design supervisor for PP&L. And what Dr. Fadley was alluding to is we will have to bring three-phase electric into the transportation facility, which we don't currently have. We currently have single-phase. We have to get Spring Township permission because the three-phase resides just towards 724 from us across the Spring Township property, which most likely won't be an issue. They would probably give us the waiver for that. But we would also have to bring our own power grid in to power all of these buses. We currently have 63 vehicles that could be replaced over time with an electric or propane comparative bus. We would have to bring in 63 charging stations at $2,500 apiece. We would have to bring in the electric because we'll exceed 2,500 kilowatt hours to power these vehicles. So they can't give us an exact cost until we get the kilowatt hours that we'll need, the voltage we'll need, but we're talking bringing in a electric substation into the transportation facility, which is not a cheap proposition. I also then talked to a woman by the name of Heather Bash from PP&L. She's their Act 129 coordinator, and PP&L does not, PECO does, PP&L does not offer any financial incentive to help you bring in infrastructure. What they do offer is an incentive or a rebate on your kilowatt hour charge for reducing your kilowatt usage. Going from diesel to electric does not qualify for that incentive either. So there is nothing there from PP&L. Now, there's probably something else out there from another state agency, but again, it's not like PECO. PECO is offsetting the cost of infrastructure. So overall, I mean, looking at, I started this propane analysis in February of last year and walked through the highs and lows and, uncovered some things that really made me pause and kind of talk through with DLT and administration, is this the right route to go? Electric wasn't part of the analysis because electric buses in the research I've done, which hasn't been terribly extensive, but it's been fairly extensive, it's just not a technology today. We're trying to reduce the footprint of the diesel emissions, reduce our costs, DEF, DEF, the regens that have to be done on diesel buses. So that's where the analysis was, and that's where my recommendation comes from.
Thank you. Any other discussion?
Amy.
Oh, Dr. Kennedy?
So, can we make a commitment to start working now towards building that infrastructure, since we know we're going to be going towards electric and be putting money aside and be looking for, can we be thinking about it? And when the time comes, whether it's next year, I mean, this is only a small percentage of it's 10% of our bus fleet. So when the time comes and electric shifts to the more viable solution, we can be ready to go, rather than behind the 8 ball.
Yep. I think the continued investigation of the investment of electric is the way to go. Again, the technology just is not here today, and it's not, from what I'm seeing and hearing, it's not going to be here in the near future, the next 5 to 8 years. It's there, it's not going to be perfected. So I would agree, and I think Dr. Fadley would agree, that is something that we start looking for. We have a grant writer, they're not affiliated with a propane company, but, there's also a third grant that I just found out about. It's a voucher system. It's first come, first serve. And whether we go electric or propane or diesel, he's going to apply for that for us. It's before the November deadline for the VW grant. So, that's the kind of people that we're going to surround ourselves with to help us, and talk more with PP&L. Okay, we can't get anything from you. We know PECO does. What other options do we have? So, yeah, I think investigating going forward is a great idea.
I just want to answer Amy's question either. We really don't have to set aside, because when that time comes, we can finance it through capital projects. So you won't want to put money aside today for something down the road, but we could say in 5 years, that's the way to go. We could do that very quickly, that's all.
And we've seen through the years with other technologies that as those newer technologies become more prevalent, the cost of production, the costs of maintenance of those newer technologies come down as well. Mr. Case, I applaud all of the time that you've put into looking out for the best interests of the district, not only fiscally now, but long-term. And I think that certainly spurred some further research and conversation into this matter. The information that had been shared to the rest of the board regarding some of the numbers that were discussed previously or tonight, I think would be helpful to make that public as well, to show the due diligence that has been done since you raised many of these points last week. But certainly moving forward, we should always be mindful of where we can find those savings. It just doesn't appear to be at this point with electric, just in my opinion.
The $3 billion, they were saying that's 1.5 million can go to a single institution, which would take care of many buses and/or infrastructure, and then that AFIG grant is, the priority number one is zero emission. Propane was number 3 on that list, from the priority of whether you were getting that. So just to recap, it's my understanding we're going to spend, how much money are we spending on the propane infrastructure day one?
Our out-of-pocket?
Yeah.
Our out-of-pocket is going to be about $250,000 to $300,000 after, if we get the grants as well.
So $250,000 to $300,000, which we could be spending, and because there's other grants that could possibly do that for almost nothing for the infrastructure for electric and to offset buses. And again, there's money flying all around for electric buses right now. I know they're expensive and the cost will come down. However, grant money will dry up as the price comes down as well.
Right.
Now's the time. I mean, and speaking of, I'm not sure, I respectfully disagree with the replacing batteries at 6 years. I'm not sure where that number came from, but maybe that's a specific issue with a specific vendor. Lion Bus, 300-plus electric buses deployed, including Massachusetts, Vermont, British Columbia, Colorado, Albany, Quebec. Bluebird just sent the state's first electric buses to West Fargo, North Dakota in June 2019. So the technology's there. They're being implemented. I work for Morgan Truck Body. We're starting to look at Amazon electric vehicles. Lion is building trucks or buses for Amazon.
Right.
So, I mean, this is mainstream. Again, my concern is with propane, we're spending $250,000, $300,000, assuming we're going to get this grant money for 10 years. So in 5 years, is it going to be a sunk cost? I mean, your numbers are based on going out 10 years to get that money back.
No,
Right.
my numbers are current here and now numbers. They're not. So the 15-year projection is what Lion provided. So that's what I ran that 15-year projection on. But even your per mile, your today per mile cost is substantially lower.
That's with an annual maintenance service cost of $2,000 versus, and I'm not going to argue numbers here
No,
in
no.
public
No.
and stuff, but I'm not quite sure how the maintenance is more on an electric vehicle when brakes are 3 times less that need to be replaced on an electric bus, and tires. There's no moving parts to an electric bus. So that number baked in is based on batteries being replaced at 6 years, I'm assuming?
No, I can't answer. The brakes are not included in that number. They were specific that brakes were not included in TCO. I believe they probably did include batteries in that. I truly appreciate everything you've done, because I called Lion Electric on Thursday and haven't heard back from them. So you heard back quicker than I did. The VW grant, it's up to $1.5 million, but it's only up to $182,000 per vehicle. So you're not able to say, well, I want all 1.5 million. If you have the buses to qualify
That's one
for
grant,
it.
though. You can offset that with the AFIG grant, correct?
You cannot. The AFIG grant will look at what you got from the VW grant and take that money away. So they don't allow you, because trust me, that was one of my first questions. Let's
Okay.
do both.
I mean, you're the expert. I'm not going to,
No, and I ask questions. I'm not the expert. I ask questions from the people who are helping to write the grant and everything else. So, it's the other piece with the VW grant, which affects propane or electric, is you have to have 2009 or older vehicles that you're getting rid of. And you don't just get rid of them. You have to drill the engine block, and you have to cut the frame to make that bus no longer usable as a diesel vehicle, because the whole goal is to get the diesel emissions out. So you have to look at that. We have 5 vehicles this year out of the 7 that we're looking to purchase that would fall under the availability. So the max we can get under VW for 5 vehicles is about a little less than $1 million. If you got the whole 182 for an electric vehicle. On the propane side, we can get up to $150,000 for those 5 vehicles. We can sell the other 2 and get that income and get the scrap money. So again, there's qualifiers.
And I appreciate all your research. I'm not here to say no propane ever. I mean, my no is just to say, hey, because we're not going to solve this right now, let's pause for a week or 2. Let's reach out to if we don't have all the answers, maybe we do, and at least then vote on this in 2 weeks, with a little bit more of the numbers and reaching out to some suppliers. And if we've done that already, fine. But I didn't get the sense that we did.
And again,
We have a $9 billion transportation company practically in our backyard in Penske, which has over 330,000 heavy-duty vehicles on the road. Less than 300 of them are electric vehicles. So we have a $9 billion transportation company that still can't make the numbers work on electric vehicles, partly because of what you said, the necessary infrastructure improvements and so forth like that. So I don't see how us as a school district with a lack, with resources not matching that can make the numbers work in the short term. I agree with you that it definitely requires further investigation, and to the point, it's in 5-10 years, the numbers may work better, but it's still a, relatively speaking, a speculative market at this point that I don't think we should be taking the risk on with our fiduciary responsibility.
And school districts, I believe, being that, there are 100-mile buses, Penske's a bit different because you guys are doing, longer hauls, if you will.
Are specifically used for routes in California with less than 100 miles.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other discussion or comments? Roll call, please.
Kennedy?
Yes.
Mrs. Cocker?
Yes.
Mr. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. McCray?
Yes.
Mr. Negrini?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mrs. Casper?
Yes.
Mr. Case?
No.
Mr. Hart?
Yes.
It's 8-4, 0 against, I'm sorry, 1 against.
Policies, Ms. Cocker.
Yes, 15.1, final reading and adoption of the following revised policies. Number 103, discrimination, Title IX, sexual harassment affecting students. Number 103, 2 attachments. Number 104, discrimination, Title IX, sexual harassment affecting staff. Number 104, 2 attachments. Number 209, health examinations and screenings. Number 220, student expression, distribution, and posting of materials. Distribution and posting of materials. Number 247, hazing. 249, bullying or cyberbullying. 314, physical examination. 317.1, educator misconduct. 318, attendance and tardiness, new policy. 326, complaint policy. 333, professional development. 334, sick leave. 338, sabbatical for restoration of health and leave of absence for professional development. Number 442, jury duty, will become 342 once approved. Number 709, building security. 805, emergency preparedness. 805.1, relations with law enforcement agencies, which is a new policy. 805.2, school security personnel, new policy. 824, maintaining professional adult student boundaries, and 913, relations with special interest groups.
Looking for a motion to approve final reading of adoption of policies that were just listed. Looking for a motion? Mr. McCray first, Mr. Martin second. Any discussion? Yes.
Just very briefly on 220 regarding student expression. Obviously, as we have been involved in a virtual world with a lot of classes being conducted virtually, there is the potential for certain signage or obviously clothing or other material that perhaps would not necessarily be utilized here in the classroom, but it's still being part of the everyday educational process. There certainly have been instances in this very divisive presidential election that's forthcoming that there have been instances where the lines sometimes can be blurred between what is legitimate expression and what may be deemed as disruptive to the educational process. And so it is a situation that hopefully we have not had to deal with, and hopefully that we don't have to deal with in the future. But it does beg the question as to who would then be the arbiter of what those materials or postings are or are not appropriate. And again, these are times where, you know, a district can be involved in the public eye for perhaps the wrong reasons or the right reasons, depending upon your perspective on the matter. And I would just kind of put that out as a hypothetical as we continue to move on in this virtual landscape that we've been learning to become more and more accustomed to. That's all.
Thank you. Any other discussion? I'm sorry. Any other discussion? All those in favor? I'm sorry, it's a roll call. 15.1. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Cocker?
Yes.
Mr. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. McCray?
Yes.
Mr. Negrini?
Yes.
Mr. Schneider?
Yes.
Mr. Case?
Yes.
Mrs. Casper?
Yes.
Dr. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mr. Hart?
Yes.
9-4, 0 against.
15.2 and 15.3, Mrs. Cocker?
Yes, 15.2, we have second readings of policies, and 15.3, we have first reading of the policies as attached.
Okay. Our enrollment report is attached. Committee reports. Mrs. Casper, Berkeley Career and Technology Center.
No report for BCTC. Our next meeting is October 28th.
Equity Task Force?
Equity Task Force, yes, we met on Wednesday, October 7th at 3 in the high school library, which was an incredibly fruitful discussion, given that we had examined the feedback from the high school students who were questioned from our first round of focus groups. We split up into small groups and each group, one group per focus group question responses. I personally could have kept discussing and kept the discussion going all day. I found it so much more comfortable and useful to discuss these topics from the student's perspective. A few points that most struck me from the data that we discussed from the focus groups. The first point was that students clearly expressed a thirst for discussing issues around race and social justice. In fact, many of them claim that either the discussions didn't exist, that the discussions were difficult, and some also mentioned that it didn't pertain to them. The second point that struck me was that there was a lot of circling around language, around specific topics like terms like racist, racism, diversity, equality, and equity. It was like a circling around. They weren't sure what the meanings of the words were necessarily in the context that they were being used, which appears evident that perhaps some students are getting ideas about these concepts from a variety of sources, and not just from school. The third point was there seemed to be a void in the curriculum's address of these concepts. This is certainly not a dig on the teachers and the supportive administrators who are in fact engaging in these types of discussions and in teaching the content, as I know personally that this is really difficult to do, especially in a context where it's not done often. Perhaps those teachers not only need to be asked how we might better support them, but also how we might integrate their work across the curriculum. I noticed that the void seemed to take on two major forms from the data that we saw. The first one was just the basic objective teaching and integration of the subject matter. Subject matter related to marginalized and oppressed groups, and issues around racism and social justice. There was in fact a comment that said the content needs to match the shifting demographics of Wilson's population. The second form that I noticed was in actually providing or extending more opportunities for students to engage in these kinds of subjective conversations or discussions, and more formal conversations, like in the classroom, around how they feel about the injustices and the content that they are being exposed to. And this is one where I think teachers need the most support. For again, I know this is difficult to do in today's polarized context. I know I may have missed some other important parts of the discussion, but I was really happy to see the turnout at the meeting from teachers, administrators, and our fellow board member, Mike, which, as an aside, we had a conversation on the way out where Mike pointed out that this data presents enough evidence that we can start to do something, even if it's just to host a discussion with students or teachers to explore other action steps. I realize that we will continue to seek more student data, and I think that's important too. But I also agree with Mike in that we should start to put something into action, given that the data we've already gathered. I also thought we need to be looking more at systemic kinds of data from the district. Data such as that from our equity audit, disciplinary referrals, and the processes that we have by which students and parents or community members can express grievances. So although this was an incredibly productive meeting, I think it also exposed that we have a lot of work to do here at Wilson around equity and race relations. So that's my report. Our next meeting is scheduled for November 4th at 3 p.m. After the election.
Great, thank you.
I just want to add a couple of comments to that, because I was in one of the small breakout groups that looked at the comments from the various folks that participated in the survey. And it was interesting, and my comments are being generated because we have this elective course where these topics are discussed. And the people that are in those courses had a very favorable outlook from the teachers, and they felt the teachers did a great job. But without that elective, if you don't take that elective, those discussions aren't going to take place. So what I was thinking, and now this goes back when I was in school in geography or political science, we always had current events. We would talk about current events of the day. Back then it was the Vietnam War, which obviously maybe was a bad thing back then, but it got, pros and cons. So I was thinking something easy, as simple as having an open discussion in, I don't know what appropriate class would be, but before you get to 12th grade, because once you get to 12th grade, it's pretty much useless, especially as elective. So let the students take charge of the situation, let them have fruitful discussions in a classroom setting with an instructor that understands, to handle the situation. So I think we could do something like that. It's not going to cost much. I don't know about the education component from the timing, how to get all this into a program, but I think there's opportunities there to let the kids have a very fruitful discussion as a group. That's it.
Thank you. Berks County IU and Curriculum Council, Dr. Kennedy.
The curriculum committee has a meeting on, October 28th at 4 o'clock. And I was able to go to the BCIU board meeting, and the only report I have is that it was the shortest meeting of the year. It was done by 7:30. So just my luck. That's all. Thank you.
Berks CIT, Mr. Schlossman. Thank you. Extracurricular, Mrs. Cocker.
Yes, the extracurricular committee met with the finance and facilities committees through our joint meeting last Wednesday. And the main topic was the future of the baseball fields and the hope that we could bring the varsity baseball team back to the home campus. The result of the discussion sort of led us into the bigger discussion around the feasibility study, just because the amount of resources that would be needed to correctly and thoroughly bring the baseball team back to the home campus would require more of a big picture. So we are going to bring that discussion back to the full board and left it at that at the joint meeting. We have our next meeting on November 9th at noon. But before I finish, I would like to have two big highlights. Our golf team ended their season with a 15-0 record. They're District 3 champions, and it's the first District 3 championship in golf in Wilson's history. And in case some people don't get the Reading Eagle, front of the sports page, our very own Kim Underwood, Coach Underwood, is the state coach of the year, and did a great job with our field hockey team again this year with a 9-2 record, and we're very proud to have Coach Underwood as not only a staff member but also a wonderful coach, and she teaches the team more than just field hockey. She teaches them about life, and it's very nice, a very nice highlight for extracurricular. So thank you.
Thank you. Facilities, Mr. Negrini.
Thank you. There were a few items that we discussed at our meeting that was on the agenda this evening that we voted upon. The big item that was discussed and recommended pertaining to the 2019 A bond was to utilize the remainder or the bulk of the remainder of that bond to make the roofs at the lower house and upper house warranty out through the year 2034, so that we have at this point all of our buildings roofs in a good place for the course of the next 20 years. We decided to hold off on spending any money on replacing some seating in the auditorium. We had received a price of $19,000 to replace the front 2 rows in the auditorium, but as Ms. Cocker had indicated earlier, the conversation seemed to dovetail into the larger discussion about what the future of our high school campus would look like, and whether or not an auditorium renovation project is something that we should consider moving forward with in the near future. So that will be a topic of conversation. I think we're looking to schedule a workshop on November the 9th and have some further information for the public on those conversations. That's my report.
Thank you. Finance, Mr. Martin.
Pretty much, it's been all said. We'll be working diligently, ready for November 9th meeting, so there's at least some feel for whatever is decided, the cost for those things to the taxpayer. So I really don't have anything more to add to that. Our next meeting, by the way, is November 2nd here at the school at 4:30.
Thank you. Human Resources, no report. Legislative, Mr. Martin.
The session days are pretty much coming to a close. They're in 3 days this week, and then they're in 1 day after the election, and that's pretty much it. But there's a couple of items that are important. One of those items is the emergency certification procedure. They're trying to pass that, and I will believe that will get through the committee to give folks the ability to issue these certificates a little bit earlier, especially for new teachers that don't have the ability or time to get the certificate. So that should pass that's bipartisan, so that should not be an issue. There's some other things that are really related to finance. The governor wants to obviously push through the marijuana bill, which would allow marijuana to be raised and grown, and it would be a taxable event for the state, which would increase revenues. And, there's, I'm not sure where that's going, but there is, depending on what side of the fence you're on, it's plus and minuses. But he made a comment that doesn't sit well with me, and basically, he said it's going to stimulate economic growth and to help minorities from being harmed by disproportionately laws that have harmed them in the past. I don't like that type of talk because I think it's just, once again, it's pointing out a group of people that, you get negative thoughts right away. Well, that's a problem. I don't like that. I think it could have been presented much better, but, that's what it is. So I don't know if that's going to make it through or not, but we shall see. That's it.
Thank you. Public Relations, Mrs. Troutman.
Mr. Hart, public relations items are going to be covered in Ms. Clark's report.
Okay.
This evening, there's a duplicate, so Ms. Clark is going to share those when it's her turn.
Okay. Thank you. Ed Foundation, Mr. Case.
No report, thank you.
Technology, Mr. Schneider. Student Outreach, Ms. Johnny Clark.
Hi, I would like to start off by saying that I checked onto the Wilson High School student government website, and there is a need for grant form that students can fill out. So, Mr. Martin, I wanted to tell you about that, and they can fill it out to help with covering trip costs, and it's anonymous, so there's no embarrassment with it. So you ask a teacher to recommend you for it, so the teacher does all of it. So I wanted to tell you about that. This past weekend, on Saturday, October 17th, the National Honor Society held a ceremony for the 2020 inductees who were unable to receive their certificates due to the cancellation of the March ceremony. Thank you, Dr. Weber, Mrs. Taylor, Mrs. Dennis, Lily Snyder, and Grace Piscatelli for making this event possible. Wilson High School Spirit Club is hosting a Spirit Week in honor of Homecoming Week. Spirit Club is selling homecoming t-shirts for $5 for the high school students. The homecoming court was announced to students today during morning announcements. The list includes student representatives from different clubs and self-nominations. October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Wilson High School student government will be selling pink out shirts this week before school, during lunch periods, and after school, Monday, October 19th through Thursday, October 22nd. The shirts are $20, and proceeds will be going towards the Breast Cancer Support Service of Berks County. Shirts can be purchased by cash or check. Student government also worked on getting prom dresses from Macy's donated to our school. Thank you to Kaylin DeSante for aiding the student government in receiving 75 prom dresses from Macy's. The Bulldogs had an exciting weekend, both on and off the field. The football team won their game against Cedar Crest. The boys soccer team won their game against Daniel Boone, and the girls soccer team won their game against First Catholic. Congratulations and good luck with this week's games.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Maravich. Oh, yes.
My understanding also is that there was a successful mini-con fundraiser on Saturday. I believe the car wash raised, my understanding, over $1,300.
Yes, the car wash. Along with, we had a fundraiser at Yogo Crazy the same night, and a scavenger hunt that all was the same day, and we raised over $2,000 with all of that combined.
That's
so
great.
It was very
That's great.
successful.
Thank you. Mr. Maravich. We have one participation, comment, but Mrs. Carroll.
Sarah Stump, community member, regarding COVID numbers. The Pennsylvania Department of Health released the level of community transmission table for week ending 10/16/20 today, and Berks County has moved from moderate to substantial, which calls for full remote learning model according to the state. What is Wilson's plan for this? Has it been discussed? Are we looking at numbers by zip code for the 7-day average? How are we able to remain open safely? Thank you.
Dr. Faley, could you respond to that? Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right. Looking for a motion to adjourn? Any other comments before the board? Looking for a motion to adjourn? Mr. Schneider first, do you have a second? Mr. McCray, thank you.